Sports has cracked something retail has been chasing for decades. How to turn pure emotion into instant action, real loyalty, real urgency, identity. Why will a Knicks fan wait in line for 2 hours to buy a hat, but won't wait 2 seconds for a retailer's email to load? So today we're going to talk about the intersection of sports and retail. And we have two fantastic guests with us to help us dissect that subject. So welcome to Retail OCD. We're three operators who spent our careers inside of retail, and we're still obsessed with it. I'm Deanne Campbell, maestro of store design, operations, and customer experience strategy.
I'm Barney Stacher. I'm a chief conversational officer for Retail OCD, and go Knicks.
And I'm Josh Rockoff. I'm a wartime marketer and technologist, and I'm going to say go Knicks and Knicks in 5.
Who are the Knicks?
Hey now.
Josh, do you want to introduce Eli?
Yeah, we have some really good guests today, and the first I want to introduce is Eli Getson. Eli's had a distinguished career. In fact, I actually even said it to Deanne. I think I had a little bit of a man crush when I first got introduced to him. So Eli, without any to do, why don't you give us a couple of minutes on your background?
Yeah, I'm a dyed-in-the-wool merchant. I think you said retail OCD. I'm obsessed with it as well. I've been in a lot of different spaces, from sports retail to specialty to designer to big box, most recently to small DTC brands. And I've always been fascinated along that journey with the confluence of sort of consumerism, retail, sports, culture, fashion, music, technology. So really feels like we're at this sort of moment in time where a lot of this is crescendoing. And it's a lot of things, especially recently, that you can sort of see all these things intersecting together. So just a really interesting time. And again, I love talking about this stuff.
Michael Zakur, you are the founder and chief strategy officer of 5 New Digital. And this is a company that I find really interesting. You work with quite a broad range of people, retailers, CPG companies, manufacturers, brands, and you work on something.
The new retail model, unified commerce.
You talk about the 5 new realities of the digital revolution. I wonder if you could help us understand that and tell us a little bit about your company.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Dan, Barney, Josh. Thank you for having me. Eli, great to be on here with you. Yes, I am a 33-year veteran of the intersection between commerce, retail, emerging technologies, and consumer behavior. At 5 New Digital, we work with companies literally of all sizes and shapes, and we work with them on digital excellence and digital enablement. And really the big thing for us is, how do you best integrate online and offline? How do you create a unified commerce experience? How do you build points of experience for consumers? So that's what 5 New Digital does. But in addition to that, I'm also a managing director at an M&A firm called Sellside Group. And we do a lot of buying and selling of sports and sports adjacent entities. And I also run a fund called Tompkins Ventures, where we're investors in sports and sports related ventures as well.
I don't really follow basketball too much, so I came as close as possible. And this is I don't wear it very often, so you guys are special. My vintage Toronto Maple Leafs jersey, signed in 1994 by the team captain, the goalie, Wendell Clark, Felix Potvin, and Doug Gilmour. So I'm very.
You bring up an interesting point, which is that's very of the moment, signed, dated merchandise and vintage. And as a merchant, I think about what can be used after the season. And that's why I'm in a brand new Knicks orange unbranded polo. So I could wear it for all the events, for this podcast, and then under a jacket later. But I think that I was downstairs yesterday in New York, and it was the most impressive crush of orange and blue emblazoned merchandise I've ever seen. You want to talk about the Kiss Army? That was the Knicks Army. And in terms of merchandise licensing, I've never seen anything more impressive in Manhattan or in sports merchandising. And Eli, could you speak to that in terms of the loyalty of those fans, whether they be Knicks or Kiss?
I think I'll speak to the Knicks. I think between the officially licensed merchandise and then the sort of black market t-shirt merchandise, it without question was one of the biggest commercial events for any team winning in probably any sport. If you could actually say, okay, here are all the official license sales, and then here were the underground license sales, it'd be off the charts. And I think it speaks to something. There's kind of three things that I think are really interesting here. One is just over the last 15 years, the elevation of what we would consider to be fan gear from both a quality and fashion perspective is a real sea change in the market. Because if you think back to the origins of fan gear, it was like t-shirts and sweatshirts, white label, kind of unbranded. So that's a really interesting phenomena. The second thing too is I think in the space and the age we live in, the communal experience is what everyone wants. And I think that if you just look at merchandise sales kind of writ large for any kind of big live event, whether that's the Masters, the Knicks Championship, an F1 event, they grow at much higher rate than general apparel. And I think it's because you talked earlier about it in your intro about the emotional connection. People are willing to spend money on that emotional connection and they want to show their fandom. And then the third thing, again, is just this confluence. The Knicks championship became the cultural moment of the last couple of weeks, and everyone wants to be in that cultural moment. So it doesn't surprise me. I think probably when the final numbers are in, it's going to be astronomical what a good event it is. And there's some halo that's going to last for quite some time, too.
That's
A question that it's for either one of you. That makes me wonder, is sports creating culture or is it chasing it?
Michael, why don't you take that?
I think it's a little bit of both. Does art imitate life or does life fuel art? I think there's a little bit of both in there. And you have to take it from the context that sports is a global phenomenon, whether it's cricket in India or the National Football League in the US or soccer in the rest of the world. This is a global. You can think of very few things that unite the world more than sports. And sometimes divide the world. But for the most part, I think it's a global good. And it comes back to what Eli was saying. This is about community, camaraderie, emotional investment, right? But there's also something missing here that I think we don't talk about enough, which is sports has filled the vacuum left by what used to be an American monoculture. We're all watching different shows. We all have our heads down. We're not talking to each other on the subway. We never talked to each other on the subway. That was bad.
People on the subway.
So it's the monoculture, right? And that it's the last one standing. And I think that's really important to what sports is about. And when you tie that monoculture together with emotional investment, and what do we all want to do as merchandisers, as brands, as retailers? We work hard every day to create an emotional connection between our brand and our product and the consumer. And guess what? That's done for you in sports. People are invested. They cry, they laugh, they hug, they get buried in their favorite team's uniform. Talk about emotional investment. So I think as we're looking to how sports and sports adjacent retail and merchandising has come over the last few years, it's really filled that monoculture, emotional community investment that we don't get because we don't have no bowling leagues anymore, and church attendance is down, and all those things that bind a community together. Sports is the one that remains.
And it's the one where, as you said, it's win or lose. It's not music. It's win or lose. We win or we lose.
And Barney, to that point, it's unscripted. In a world where we've been living with reality TV for 25 years, we've learned that 90% of reality TV was scripted. Where else can you go and say, I have no idea how this is going to turn out?
One last point. I would also say, too, it's the last thing we have that rewards you for watching it live.
Yeah.
And that's sort of the mystique of it, which then carries into, hey, I lived it, I watched it live, I engaged with it. I want to continue to have that passion. I'm going to invest in the jersey. I'm going to invest in the t-shirt. I'm going to have my kids have all the gear. Barney, you saw it. I was mesmerized by the fact that it was wall-to-wall Knicks gear. Well, legit, not legit, had no idea, to be honest. But at the end of the day, it was wall-to-wall. Look at what Michael's wearing right now. He's got his Arsenal jersey. He's got an Arsenal hat. He probably has some Arsenal socks on.
How does that experience in the Madison Square Garden connect to the experience that's being projected on the screen on the wall? and in all of the bus stop videos. And how does a brand extend that experience in a live moment so that community is really built and established that way?
That's where I think sports brands, I think any sports brand, whether it's Arsenal, whether it's the Knicks, whether it's
F1.
F1, Augusta National, it's the way that they think about themselves. This is the difference between, I think, retail and where we're at in sports and what conventional retail can learn from sports. Sports thinks of themselves almost like old Hollywood would. It's myth making. It's your
Storytelling.
your storytelling, your myth making around all these things in relation to this team, its history, the live event, its fans. And then the merchandise it's an ancillary revenue stream, but it's one word cements itself, where it's like, I want to identify being a fan, and I want to walk in the airport and see other people identifying as being fans. And it's an immediate connection point. I think that's where sports is much further ahead than retail, whereas a lot of retailers, it's a binary mindset. It's like, I make something, I bring it to market, I sell it at a price, I try and drive some consumer loyalty, rinse and repeat. Whereas in the sports side of it is where right now they're creating the full 360 around storytelling. And oh, by the way, they've gotten just so much better. Everyone has gotten so much better in terms of the quality and the caliber of merchandise they're selling.
Very much. And if you listen to Mamdani's speech, connecting that to the arc of history and the longevity of the brand and how he picked players and moments every generation can find and buy into. And what retailer does that? Harrods?
Maybe.
Fortnum and Mason. I don't think you really find U.S. retailers in this space, even though obviously U.S. retailers are dominant in the space. The reality is, you go back to the old school, Fortnum and Mason, Harrods, some of those that are overseas. I would love to know, Michael and Eli, as you're thinking about these things, what about the appeal of the Yankees and the Dodgers, but not in the U.S.? Not in the U.S. How much of Michael, this is a conversation I would love to have about the overexposure of brands, right? The saturation of what's going on. New York Yankees, you find people wearing New York Yankees caps in Piccadilly Circus in London, outside a cafe in Rome. You find them in Greece, and they're not American, right? They are clearly tourists from other places around the world. They're maybe from Japan, maybe from Russia. The reality is this oversaturation, yet they're no longer a U.S. sports team. They're a brand. They're an icon.
Absolutely.
It almost allows you to be authentic, like an American authentic thing, by wearing a Yankees hat or a Dodgers cap, right? And so I guess that's the bigger question. It goes to a topic that I think would be valuable. What about the oversaturation of these things? And are the Yankees and the Dodgers, just like the Knicks, the Blackhawks, or these iconic teams, is this just this is how America has matured, or is this something else?
Yeah, so great question. I love that topic. What we've seen over the last 30 years, but even more so in the last 15, is the emergence of sports franchises as global brands. So let's just take Arsenal for a moment. We, in May, won the English Premier League for the first time in 22 years. And all the video I watched, and believe me, I watched hours of glorious video after the win, they were showing wild scenes in Nairobi, 25,000 people in the city square, wild, largest parade in London's history. 1.6 million people showed up for the Arsenal parade. But guess what? Then they panned to all the celebrations happening in the US and the Irish Arsenal supporters and the Chinese Arsenal supporters. So these are global brands. They know exactly what they're doing. And you got to give Stan Kroenke and Josh Kroenke and KSE a lot of credit for this in helping turn the Rams and Arsenal into global brands, right? So I think there's this global brand appeal that crosses borders, which is really fascinating to me. And boy, oh boy, if you think back 30 years ago, even the English Premier League, it was a very local experience. It was local. Everything was local. People talking about, oh, soccer is finally coming to its own in the US, right? Everybody thought it was going to be MLS in 1994 that would do it. It turns out what propelled soccer into the mainstream was when NBC picked up the rights 15 years ago. And now every kid in America can watch every single Premier League game, every Champions League game. We're not dumb people. We like the best in the world, right? And I love MLS and I'm a Red Bulls fan, but let's face it, the best players in the world play in Europe, period, full stop. You meet the kid from Houston who's a Real Madrid fan. You meet the kid from Toronto who's a Chelsea fan. What connection do any of us have to North London or East London or West London? But you find your tribe. Now, this is the critical point where they're doing it really well. And this is what I think retailers can learn from sports franchises and successful players and athletes is we do a lot of work now trying to get people to understand, to Eli's point, the connected web. That connected web is points of experience.
Yeah.
When you build, you can turn any great point of experience into a point of sale. It's really hard to make a point of sale into a point of experience. So if you think about what the sports teams do, every journey, the website, the text, the app, the phone, the merchandise, all of that, you have built that connected web of experience. That's what we're still trying to get to the next level on in retail. And I think retail can learn a lot from that model.
Yeah. And I think one thing to add on to that, if you think about these teams as global brands, if you look at all the sort of chaos in the luxury market over the last, call it, since really COVID, these brands, to some extent, no brand is impregnable, but they are very recession proof because my fandom is going to last regardless of what's happening in my personal economy, what's happening in the global economy. And also what I find just super fascinating about it is people that continue to be willing to spend more on these experiences. Now, at some point it tops out, or they're going to have to experiment. These teams are going to have to experiment with different levels of experience for different budgets. But it is really fascinating to look at. It's one of the few consumer categories that just keeps going like this. And it's the line that goes up and to the right. That's pretty rare.
And it can hit every demographic because you can have a Knicks couture piece for $5,000 and you can have a Knicks $9.95 t-shirt. We're all in that same club.
Of athletes as influencers, just phenomenal compared to retailers who have to go and get someone, a celebrity, and pay them huge amounts of money. And they may or may not be as effective as an athlete.
This week, something very interesting happened. And I think it speaks to the paradigm shift we're going to see. And this is where, to your point, the athlete that plays in the team and the influence they have, whether that's Caitlin Clark or whoever it may be, there's something organic there, right? Whereas a retail brand that's going to find an outside influencer to try and drive relevance, creating the kind of consumer authenticity and creating the believability there is very tough. And the other thing that happened this week that I think is super interesting, the concept of athlete as investor and owner now is the next big wave. And from a brand authentication standpoint, I believe this is going to be where we're going next, is that like L Catterton's fund put $50 million into a brand called Roback, which is, it's about $140, $150 million brand. But everyone that's in that Champs fund for L Catterton are all athletes. I think the next wave is going to be, from an authenticator standpoint, it's the athlete is in the brand. Tom Brady owning a part of No Bull, the athlete is in the brand. And that's another model. I think Michael talked about it earlier, but the connected web, that's going to be another part of the connected web. That's something that retailers are going to have to think about because this is where we're going, I believe. Yeah, I think it's athlete as investor, athlete as brand authenticator. And I think that's where it's going to be.
Yeah, and it's a rollover from acting from Hollywood as well, whether it's Aviation Gin or Tom Holland's new Bureau brand. Yeah, leveraging your authenticity as an actor, which is very different from leveraging your authenticity and your actual human performance on a playing field.
And then you get a unicorn situation like Wrexham. So, what a story where Hollywood and sport and brand authentication all come together. For 2 years now, Wrexham has been going on tours of the US and other countries, playing the likes of Manchester United. And this was before they even made it to the championship, which is the second level of English football. But my goodness, that's it in a nutshell, right? Think about all the Wrexham gear, the aviation gym. They've actually seen that the GDP in the area around Wrexham has gone up over the last 5 years. Everybody's winning, the locals, and they did it so well. And by the way, they came within 2 points last year of making the playoff to play in the Premier League.
Yeah.
So look at Wrexham. That's a global branding, emotional investment phenomenon. Like, I think that's where Eli is going. I think that when you see two Hollywood actors buy a
underdog team. Right?
Yes.
I think that's where they're going. And I also know there are people I work with who are actually putting these groups together where they have an investment club or fund only for the athletes, and it's curated by the fund manager, and you're only allowed in if you're. So I think we're definitely heading towards all of that for sure.
But what
Sports too, because I'm seeing investment companies buy into either minor league or
Yep.
alternative sporting leagues.
Yep.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, that is also that progression is more leagues.
it was the first time that the NFL allowed private equity ownership, right? And they bought in to the Washington Redskins, they bought into other places. You have obviously Ryan Reynolds, right? Famous actor buying into soccer teams overseas. I guess the bigger question is we've been extremely lucky in the sense that it's almost like an insatiable appetite. And as it gets more expensive on the professional level, it just keeps on working down. So you look at the New York Giants, you look at Dallas Cowboys, their value of their franchises just extraordinarily skyrocketed to the point where they're billions, 12 billion, 15 billion, $20 billion to invest in these things. World Cup tickets are insanely priced, right? To go to a New York Knicks game, Celebrity Row was like $1 million to buy a game ticket. You have all the merchandise, you have all the angles. Literally, you're covering all this. But is the average fan, the people that really want to go to a game, getting priced out of it? And at the minor league level, and as you move down to single A and the various leagues for baseball, is there a limit? And at the merchandising level, when do we get to oversaturation? When does it get to the point, or we're not there yet, for another 50 years, this thing can keep on growing?
I have a tendency to think we're not at the point of oversaturation, because I also think that if you look at what a lot of these teams are doing, the digital products they're introducing, who's to say? There was a lot of talk of this, and I don't necessarily think it ever kind of got off the ground, but maybe the tech is still 5 years away from where it needs to. But you put on your headset, you're paying, instead of the $1 million courtside seat, you're paying $25 to give you the vantage point that you're courtside.
And they've done that.
And they're
rooms, you've seen those, the oval, the half oval, where you feel like you're on the field. It's amazing.
Yeah, but it's not ubiquitous
No.
because VR technology is nowhere near it. I guess my hot take is I don't see it slowing down. I think if you look at the level of investment that's pouring into the space, the Ice Cube's 3-on-3 league is supposedly going to go public at a massive valuation. At the end of the day, who's watching this? I have no idea, but it just seems like sports right now is the hot investment space for everyone. So I don't think you're hitting saturation for a while.
And I think you've got breadth, like media, like any kind of digital media. You will find, okay, I'm going to watch the Savannah Bananas, or I'm going to watch the minor leagues, or I'm going to watch this. Plenty of room for all.
Yeah, to Eli's point, I think sometimes we're all a little bit guilty of forgetting that the big sports today started off as grassroots from the field up. And that's why I used to dismiss and be a little bit arrogant about these minor crazy sports. Like I'm watching cornhole tossing on ESPN, but they got a goddamn audience for it, right? So what I think is happening is as we move up in the price range and people are getting priced out at the top, it's just constant regeneration, these new grassroots sports. Who would have thought when MMA debuted 30 years ago that we'd be seeing a fight on the White House lawn? MMA was like, it was underground fight club before it went mainstream. Boy, did it go mainstream. So I've learned over the years to be understanding better that these are all grassroots efforts now.
And women's sports has just exploded in popularity. And I think even a decade ago, no one would have foreseen that. The popularity of women's basketball, women's hockey.
Yeah, there was no women's professional hockey. There was no women's professional soccer. Think about the fan bases you're developing at the grass. Now that you're seeing this side. So Josh, I think the answer is we're far from saturation, but there's a but here. The but, some of these higher end franchises and teams need to be careful about monetizing to death. They can get into a situation where I call monetize to death is every hidden fee, every upcharge, every upsell, everything has a dollar or a penny attached to it. Who enjoys flying? Who likes going to the doctor? Who likes their health insurance? Because what all these industries have in common is they've monetized the consumer to death. They've taken the joy and the love, and they can crush that experience and that community by going too far. I don't think we're there yet, but we've seen it happen in other industries. And I think in general, global sports need to be aware of that. But that ties into talking about the different levels, right? I go and take my son to see Arsenal play a couple times a year. So we fly to London, right? And
Oh, that's awesome.
Game. We're in London for a week. We're eating at the restaurants. We're shopping at Harrods. I inevitably walk out of the Arsenal shop with 2 giant bags stuffed with stuff from the ground. So there's a whole sports economy. And I think maybe that's where we're all zeroing in here, is that there is a global sports economy that's tied to global sports retail.
And it is one that's evergreen because your son, your grandson, your great grandson, it's all Arsenal as well. Generational DNA.
Handed down.
And
Look, fandom is evergreen. At the end of the day, the team will go up, the team will go down, but the fandom stays evergreen for the most part.
Well, there's some Mets fans who might argue that, and I wouldn't blame them.
Or Jets fans.
You're right, Eli.
Giants
Hey,
fan
Leafs.
and a Mets fan.
Leafs, they
Um,
haven't won since 1967.
But
Wow.
that's all true. But I would say, just again, let's use the Knicks as our sort of proxy right now. If those teams do win at some point, the commercial event becomes that much bigger. I was saying this to a friend, like we're texting back and forth during the Knicks playoff run. I was like, the only team, the Knicks may have been the only team left in sports, with maybe the exception of the Buffalo Bills, who, if they won at the time, they were still in the playoffs. But when they won, the outpouring of emotion was so unbelievable, right? And that's sort of, again, that's why I say fandom is evergreen. Right now, I look at it as, if I'm in the sports merchandise space, all I have to do is keep being more creative in terms of the products I'm bringing to market. I might not buy a new Knicks shirt every year, but if you're coming out with something cool every year, you're making me look, because I want to be a part of this community. I want to be a part of this tribe.
The community bleeds over into other industry sectors too, like grocery. You walk into a grocery store and huge displays around whatever team is playing, or tournament, or Super Bowl, or a big game coming up. You travel, the hotels, you walk in and there are sign-ins and there are discounts and deals, even streaming services, sports betting. That's a whole other thing that we don't even need to get into.
No. You're right. But every consumer brand, regardless of the vertical, wants to be connected to sports.
Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
It doesn't even matter what level they want to be connected, even dance troops and things. So I go to G League games, right? It's 20 minutes from my house. It includes parking pass. They give you food. I buy floor seats, which is great. My kids love it. It's $125 a game, right? So per seat for the floor, you can't even sniff the upper deck at MSG for that. You go to a Yankee game, you could probably do pretty decently there, but it's still 88 games. It's what, 26, 30 games at MSG? And the reality is it's much more affordable. Plus 20 minutes later, I'm sitting on my couch, which is fantastic, versus fighting New York City traffic. But at some point, that's going to become untenable too, right? And so I think, though, that sports is a great connector, right? You may be at each other's throats. It's New York City, which means that everybody's at each other's throats. But all of a sudden, all these Knicks fans came out, right? And now it was New York versus San Antonio, right? It was New York versus Cleveland. And so I agree with Eli. I agree with Michael on this. When I'm thinking about this, you think about the icons of sport. And some of these people, you don't want to trust them with your kid, but you're trusting them with millions of dollars. You talk about the NFL athletes. Within 5 years after leaving the league, a lot of NFL athletes are actually bankrupt. And so I guess that goes to the question, are we setting up these athletes for success to make sure that they're successful business people and have lives after sports? What we're doing in terms of merchandising, in terms of what we're trying to sell people on in retail and consumer and CPG and all these other things, is we're chasing the fanaticism until it's not worth chasing anymore.
I think the athlete paradigm is interesting. This is the biggest cliche ever, but the ones that view themselves as brands, I'll use, there's plenty of NBA guys, or for that matter, I'd say Jason Kelsey is a really interesting perspective on this. 30 years ago, would an NFL lineman, an NFL center have that level of runway post-career? And in weird different spaces. I think the athletes that sort of understand, like, they have an interesting story, they have an interesting storytelling vibe, if you will, they will continue to monetize themselves well after they play. It's those that I think probably are more in the kind of older paradigm where it's like, hey, I make a certain amount of money and it's gone. Or I use another one like Smith, good NBA player, certainly on a championship team, had a nice career, made money, but he's had a whole second career playing college golf and talking about that, what Matt Barnes has done with All the Smoke. It's like the guys that are interesting and have interesting stories to tell, they're doing great and they'll continue to do great.
Yeah.
Stories.
That's something I've been wondering about. The Knicks were down 29 points. People who were selling jerseys probably had their hand on the send to trash button halfway during the game because they figured, oh, they're out. And probably never have anticipated what happened. How do sports retailers keep up with the speed of change that teams come and go with? It's incredible because you really don't know how much product you're going to need in any given week.
I think there's two different points to that. One is like, I think you have enough history as a sports retailer or any kind of retailer to know, okay, in Philadelphia, I know I'm going to sell a certain amount of Phillies gear. I know I'm going to sell a certain amount of Eagles gear. And all you do is plan off the average, right? Because it takes away the anomalies of here's a year that we were really good, here's a year we were really bad, right? You're planning it off the average. But then when you get in those situations where it's called a hot market and the team is excelling, and I think a lot of the planning tools that are coming online and are in place are going to help with this, but there's a certain amount of like faith, you're using as much data as you can, and then it's just leap of faith. And look, think about San Antonio for a minute. Had San Antonio won the title, it would have also been an incredibly big commercial moment for the retailers within that geography. Chances, usually within that paradigm, there's a trigger when you have to commit to all the goods. I used to make this joke when I was in that business. What you want in a championship series is especially if it's a 7-game series, you either want it to, the last thing you want is for it to go 7 games. You want it to end very quick, because if you end quick, you're not hitting the trigger where you're committing to goods. Whereas if it's 3-3 and I'm going to game 7 and one of those teams is not in my geography, that's an uncomfortable place to be. You got a liability you got to pay for.
Yeah.
That's why I love watching down on the street yesterday, the quick turn non-licensed t-shirt vendors. Because there's a level of creativity and the ability to deliver and pivot. And I was down there and I did say to a vendor, should have had more of the cream colored in the smalls, because there's a lot of women Knick fans out here in the street.
So we've talked really a lot about male dominated sports, right? Who seem, since the 1960s, 1970s, they've blown up. What about the emerging sports? Obviously Women's World Cup was huge. It's huge, right? In the 90s. And that really kind of launched Mia Hamm and this whole group of women athletes. You obviously have women NHL now. You have women baseball that kind of came out and kind of fluttered, and I'm not entirely sure they've really kind of figured that one out. But, and then obviously flag football. And flag football is doing exceptionally well. So for the emerging brands, especially women-oriented emerging sports leagues, is that changing the dynamic? Are they picking up the merchandising side that, you know, other than the Olympics, which is for equal opportunity? Are women-oriented sports, especially with the success that WNBA has and the new contracts that they've signed, Caitlin Clark making $60,000 a year, but making $30 million from Nike. I guess my question is, has that really started to peter into the merchandising decisions that both of you are starting to make? Or you're kind of like, you know what, that's nice, but it's on the sort of level of the G League?
I think it's beginning to. I think that it's more around the long-term build. I think in the long term, if you're a merchant and you have to be paying attention to that, it has to be factoring into your open to buy and your decision making, because these are important. But I view it as more of a long-term type of build. Look, you're never going to sell at this point as many Caitlin Clark jerseys as you will Jalen Brunson jerseys right now, but it has to be a part of your mix. There's just no way you can shut that off. The flag football thing you bring up is really interesting, because I think, especially with LA 28, I view that as one of the single most interesting commercial propositions.
Interesting. Very interesting. But about the male female, I would also go back to the question. This is a question. Does it still hold true that as far as male sports figures versus female sports figures, men want to be him, women want to date him? And that's not the same for female sports figures.
I don't know. I would buy dating Sophie Cunningham. She's amazing.
Yeah, I don't know, but from a commercial proposition and from a merchandise proposition, what's really grown a lot, if I look at it on a 15-year, even a 10-year continuum, is how many female specific fan brands have popped up and are successful. And the reason for it is because historically there were tons of female fans. There were tons of females that played fantasy football. Women engaging in sports, both as players and fans, was growing, and there was never product to satisfy their fandom. So you've got all these different brands now that there was an opportunity there, and maybe all we needed was just a women's Houston Astro jersey that fit her right and looked the right way. Kate Upton, Justin Verlander's wife, right? She wore the Astros sweater, immediately blew up, right? Because there's like a zillion women that want, when they go to the game or when they go to the fan party or when they go to wherever, whatever occasion is, they want to represent as fans too. And they don't want to wear these dopey male styles that are out there.
Yeah, or the baggy, yeah.
Yeah, and what's been amazing just in the last year or two is the way that has transformed, where you actually have fashion pathways being driven by sports stuff. It's almost a subsector of apparel itself. And we're not talking about somebody just wearing a jersey. We're talking about Karl Anthony Towns wearing a $7,000 jacket that, you know, everybody's going to want one too. And it's really actually setting fashion trends. The people are really creative. They're not just doing the jerseys, but as you guys were saying, they're really creating fashion out of it.
Deion Sanders, Broadway Joe Namath.
I think you were commenting like it used to be there were only like the other thing that I think has blown this up and made it a big industry. And it's helped athletes, it's helped consumer brands, it's helped fashion, it's helped everything, is the tunnel walk up. It used to be back in the day, like you cited two of them. There were like 5 athletes that like mattered from that perspective. It used to be Joe Namath, I would say Julius Erving, probably, like
Walt Clyde Frazier.
Like people were photographing them prior to the game, or in Joe Namath's case, after the game. But now that we're living the story with these athletes, it's like that's kind of created this big commercial cycle where it's like, yeah, I want to wear all this stuff. And you talked about fashion. I'll go back to the Knicks because it's kind of where we started. The amount of fashion brands that are tapped into the Knicks, incredible.
Oh, yeah. Even small partnerships like Crocs.
But everyone wants to be in this space because it's one of the few places where, if you think about all the other things that are happening, trying to sell anything, right? Markdowns, consumer budgets are tight, all the issues in retail that you deal with on a day-to-day basis. Sports product continues to be the one place where it's like, yeah, I'll spend an extra $30 on this.
Michael, I know you have to run. Eli, can you stick around for a minute? Because I'd love to hear more about the People's League.
Sure.
And
I deeply apologize.
we've loved every minute of this. So thank you so much.
So, Deanne, what's our wrap-up question? Or Eli, what do you want? Any last sort of like closing points?
I was kind of curious real quick about where you saw the future of sports retail or even just sports in general heading, because it is getting more expensive. Real fans are having a little bit more and more difficulty accessing live sports. And is that going to impact, with AI getting in the middle of it and algorithms, is that going to impact how people feel about sports, where it's going, retail, the retail aspect of it? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I don't know I don't think there's going to be a backlash because I think if you think about these trends, they've been happening for 25 years. Ticket prices have been going up exponentially for 25 years. The cost of everything is going up. I think it's certainly, as people are trying to sit around their kitchen table and like they've got so much entertainment dollar to spend, sports has been fighting with other forms of entertainment for a very long time. I do think sports has a pretty powerful moat around it. And I would say any live event where it's better to be there live has that moat, right? Because it's just not as fun watching it on TV. It's not as fun recording it and watching it later. It's more fun being at the Eras Tour than it is watching it later on Apple streaming. It's more fun watching the Knicks game live and chatting about it in all your socials than it is recording it and waiting 3 hours after the game's over to watch it. So I think sports is an incredibly powerful moat. I don't think if history is a guide, people are going to rebel at it. I do think there will be some, as people look at their entertainment dollar and are like, okay, where do we want to spend? There may be that trickle down effect. I think Josh brought up earlier with the G League. Maybe people say, you know what? I can't afford a ball game at Yankee Stadium. I'm going to go to a minor league game, or I can't afford this. Maybe we're going to try and go to this type of event for entertainment or what have you. So I do think that may be in effect. In terms of like sports retailers, though, I view sports as a much better investment / play than general merchandise at this point. I think if you look at all the trends in every sort of sector of the market, sports merchandise, licensed sports merchandise is growing at a much faster rate than general merchandise. And that's going to continue, especially as I keep going back to, as it gets, the premiumization of this stuff is really, I think, what the difference is now. Go back to really early in this industry. What kind of gear were you selling? Jerseys and t-shirts and sweatshirts. I think now you've just got way better merchant marketers, designers who are building this stuff and premiumizing it. So I don't think there's any backlash. I think that it's still a really robust space, and I think it's going to continue to be really strong.
I would love to hear more about, you're an advisor for something called the People's League. And it sounds fascinating because it's more than a golf league. It involves working with sports brands, working with creators, working with young people. I'd love to hear more about it if you could tell us.
Yeah, I was an initial investor in People's League. I don't really do a lot in the day-to-day, but a little bit about it. It's a creator golf league. I think with the explosion, you talked about the explosion of sort of sports and content. The golf creator space has become an incredibly kind of robust space. And there's several tours and there's several formats and there's a whole kind of plethora of creators. I think what the group there has done is kind of built a really compelling tour format with teams, with some equity stake, and they generate really unique content. And they've got some very strong sponsorships in there. And I think it encapsulates everything we just talked about, and that you've got primarily on YouTube, catching a lot of eyeballs, very kind of niche focus. And again, you're creating both sort of snackable content and then more long form content that people can engage with. YouTube golf is a very unique part of the ecosystem of golf in total, in that it's definitely much more how younger golfers are consuming. I think it's interesting kind of vis-a-vis what the PGA, what's happened with the PGA and LIV. I think LIV's downfall was not so much the alternate format golf maybe couldn't have worked. I think TGL has worked fine. And TGL is a great example of, they just came up with a different, people play simulator golf. Great. We're going to come up with a league in a stadium format that's simulator golf. YouTube golf is a thing, and that's what People's League is. The team there has done a really good job in terms of kind of understanding the market space and building a unique tour proposition for creators.
Canada has a mini putt golf tournament.
There's a million kind of unique tours, and people want to watch this stuff. And also people that play want to be in it because it's a way for them to earn prize money and build a profile.
Nice. Sounds fantastic. Thank you so much, Eli. We really appreciate you joining us.
Very fascinating. Yeah. Very fascinating.
Certainly appreciate it.